Their industry would thrive then, yeah.
It's all.
But it's changing. It's the signs of extremism, and whenever we get to any level of this, any level of extremes with humans, we're in the process of rolling over into the next phase of the cycle.
Well, let's hope. I'm ready to roll. So what's happening on September the 30th?
That's the point at which we expect a fulfillment of a bunch of language relative to the economy, because that's the point at which the federal government fiscal year ends. And it's also the point at which the banks have to be compliant with the international standards imposed by the Basel II and III Accords. So it's a weird thing for banks because our banks are basically bankrupt. They have no assets other than the dollars that have been stashed there. The dollars are meaningless.
Wait a minute. They have us.
Well, yes, that's true. They have a whole lot of slaves, but they're paying the slaves with phony money, and then we're giving it back to them, and the whole thing has become quite the joke.
Always been phony.
That is true to a certain extent. We have to look at it in a different way, though. While before the existence of the Fed, we had gold and silver-backed currency and treasury notes that were backed by gold and silver. The introduction of the Fed had actually gotten if you will, a resource that was backing the dollar for a number of years. And that resource was the debt that we as the individual slaves of the United States Corporation were willing to accept. Now we can't accept any more debt, and therefore the resource that backs it up is now defunct or bankrupt. It's as though we had debased our, in the Roman times, a great book to read is The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And in there they discuss the debasement of the currency by various different tricky means at the level of inserting basically, copper into silver and gold to thin it out and get more currency out of the same amount.
Kind of MO, huh?
Correct, same kind of MO, only this time what they did was they kept piling on debt until we're at the point where, looked at it one way, the dollar now has about less than 1/10 of 1% or 1/10 of a cent left of debt that it can absorb. And that debt is mainly going to be overswamped by the derivative crash.
Sure.
Any of the derivatives crashing at all is part of a systemic breakdown that will occur at that level that'll probably cascade down. And we're pretty certain from our work that the dollar actually does start dying in November of this year. And it may not exist after November of 2010. And in the meantime, we may go through a whole lot of gyrations with other kinds of currencies.
When you say Clif exists, are we talking about international reserve currency or even modestly respected international? Okay,
that's going right now. When the G20, that's another thing that's going to happen here at the end of the month, is the G20 is going to come out and they're basically going to have the basket all ready to go, and they'll be abandoning the dollar as we find in our language.
Or they'll be adding a number of other currencies into a basket and calling them equals. That's
correct.
The first step.
That's the first step towards pushing the dollar out of the global reserve.
Right.
And that first step has a real risk to it that none of the other steps have. And that is the same with any kind of currency being altered. And it comes down to confidence. I've actually had the good fortune, bad fortune, to live through time in Europe when the French went through such a gyration, and they swapped old francs for new francs. And it is arguably that currency and its effect on their colonies that started such things as the Muslim fundamentalism that we're in now in Algeria. And it caused a huge amount of chaos everywhere. And they were just doing a 5-for-1 swap. Here we're actually talking about phasing out the dollar.
Was that involved with the Algerian Civil War?
Correct. All of that whole period of history can be pinpointed to trace right back to this the old franc, new franc conversion at the end of World War II. And they were not alone. I mean, it happened in Burma. It happened all over the planet as everybody tried to adjust to the new world of the petrodollars. Those times of chaos are now upon us again as we try and undo the adjustment of the world to the petrodollars because the petrodollar is dying.
But we have this derivatives issue, and it's amusing to read the stories that purport to know or suggest to know that the total amount of derivatives is X or Y, or you see 220 trillion, 250 500 trillion. It could be 2 quadrillion. No one knows.
Yeah.
It's absolutely totally
monkey mind, as we say here, and every time we talk to George, it's like, George, now rein in the monkey mind. The number does not matter.
Right. No, it doesn't. The Chinese do matter. And when they announced that they've instructed most of their state-owned enterprises, read People's Liberation Army-owned enterprises, to default on their derivatives contract, the world winced. And most people don't understand why, but the world did wince. This is a big time bomb, and it looks like the fuse is lit.
Well, just the mere fact that they took out the flame to light the fuse is what caused gold to go up recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're still sitting on it.
And that's actually immaterial, but every dollar up is kind of a extra indicator. It's as though the pressure gauge on a pressure cooker.
If it were left to its own devices, gold would be $2,000-$3,000, somewhere up there. That's my
probably
feeling.
higher, probably significantly higher. Yeah.
And now, Richard Russell said at one point he predicts, and again, this would, I guess, have to be predicated on gold being allowed to do its own thing, which isn't going to happen. But he said that the Dow and gold would cross.
Yes, and it happened in the previous depression.
See? So only a mind like Clif High would remember that, and George Ewer, and maybe a few of you folks.
Oh, no, there's thousands of people.
Yeah,
that's the issue is, there's a lot of, and that's part of their problem because it's all confidence. The crash of the franc was a confidence issue. It wasn't really anything economic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Stand by. We shall continue in just a couple of minutes with Clif, halfpasthuman.com. Okay, and we're back. At least 16 million Americans are living in homes with upside-down mortgages right now. It is said that up to 25 million mortgages, ARMs, are going to be coming up early after the first of the year for their adjustment. And remember, their adjustment will be, it's a fixed set amount. I mean, when they made those mortgages, most of them were sold to other entities and on the basis of an assured earnings. And these are going to push millions more over the edge. So things are not looking good. Let me switch gears a little bit. Does the data point to anything regarding this swine flu pandemic and the great vaccine scare? It's really not the pandemic. It's a vaccine pandemic that is really of concern.
And it's very viral in the, pun intended, in the media.
Oh, yeah.
You can't go a day without mainstream media trying to flog you to death with all the fear language about it. Yeah, we've got some language that suggests the first of the Refusnik group is going to catch the attention of the powers that be here in this school year. As the vaccine rolls out, a number of people are just going to say no, and it's going to be something of an issue.
Yeah, like 40% of the doctors already have indicated they're not going to take it.
Yes, and with some good reason. Vaccines are an interesting concept because if you go and look at how a virus, for instance, or polio or any of the other kinds of infectious diseases that we have vaccinations for progresses through a social group, it follows a certain level of math. And if you then plot when vaccines were introduced, and the most successful, quote, successful vaccines in history, like the Salk vaccine or the even smallpox, they were all introduced into the populace after in fact, long after the disease had actually peaked in the populace.
Yes, sir.
So in this case, the Salk vaccine was hailed as, the cure, and I beg to differ.
I totally agree.
Yeah, mathematics is very unforgiving in this regard.
A lot of people are dead and crippled because of that crap, and millions of Americans have died of brain and kidney cancer because of the SV40 contaminants, which are admitted now. So a disaster.
Yes, and we find, for instance, that, well, there's some truisms that we have to acknowledge and we've got to understand these days. The first truism is that you can no longer separate press in the form of broadcast from government. And then knowing this, you can apply to that the same rule, number one rule that you must use when dealing with your government or any other government. And that is the government lies. It continues to lie and will lie in a huge and egregious fashion right to your face, and then attempt to back it up until you are coward. And now the press is being an arm of government, which is also an arm of the corporations who are getting at you through the fear language in their commercials, et cetera, are all in this situation of lying to you about all of this. The vaccine, the disease, et cetera. We wouldn't have an H1N1 and there's some